Good morning. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's another episode of the weekly or Wednesday technical forum sponsored by Love My Tool. Today we have a very special show, an extremely special show for you. In fact, it's going to be hosted by our friend Paul Offord. Before I turn over the control to him, let me just quickly introduce Tim and Tony, who all of you should know by now. Good afternoon, Tim. Good evening. Oh, good afternoon. Yes. Hi, Tim. Hi, Tony.
Hello.
Okay, so we are here, and we want to see what our friends wanted to talk about today. Good evening, Paul. Go ahead and please introduce your friends to us.
Okay, thanks very much, Denny. Hi everyone. You may have seen me on here before. I'm Paul Offord from Advance7. I've got some colleagues with me today. Rather than go round robin because it's going to get a bit choppy and complicated, let's just quickly introduce them. We've got Darren Roach on the left-hand side there. Darren is, as are all the guys, practicing troubleshooter with Advance7, majors in Microsoft and Windows technologies. And we've got Mark Tyke, whose main strengths are in networking plus end-to-end system diagnosis. Matthew York, who comes from to us from a Java and JEE background, programming background. Neil Hatton, who's like me, been in the IT industry for way too long, starting on mainframes and mid-range and covering all sorts of areas of programming and database and networking. And then there's me. So Denny kindly offered us a hijack. So we've hijacked LMTV today, and he asked us to come up with a subject. And the subject we decided on was that we wanted to talk a bit about the complications of capturing and analysing network traces in an enterprise environment. So we made up a list of the sorts of issues that we've been facing, and the first one we've got on the list actually is incorrect or missing documentation, even down to us not getting much of an idea about physical or logical data flow. So, Matthew, give us some of your thoughts on this area. And you're on mute.
Yeah,
thanks.
As Paul mentioned, we obviously visit customer sites and work on a range of projects, and there's a real broad spectrum of documentation that we see. From no documentation at all because the system's been in for so long, it's changed in such a way and organically grown, things have been added to it, to really good set of documentation where we have a really clear view of the logical data flows and the underlying physical hardware. Now, from our experience going in to see these things, it's often the case that perhaps the documentation doesn't describe everything that you're going to see. And from a troubleshooting point of view, that's really not an ideal position for us to be in. So one of the first things that we do is obviously try and get an understanding of the system from end to end, looking at logical data flows. Once we've got that, we'll try and find the underlying physical hardware that sits on switches, blades and things like that. But we have a very sort of mind in our background to not necessarily believe everything we're being told of how a system might work. It's a very case of, right, what we're going to do is we're going to split things into our functional units, and then from there we can sort of actually look on the wire and see not so much how a system does talk to each other or how a system's supposed to talk to each other, rather it's actually how the system does to speak to each other. There's a whole bunch of reasons why documentation, as I say, isn't available, but the key thing is that we will learn the data flows by seeing what we see on the wire and then discounting them on a basis of going, okay, now I understand what that's doing. We can sort of move on. Now, one of the recent projects that we've been working on was a good illustration of this, because it kind of showed that the system was doing everything it should do, but what was actually happening under the covers was some data flows, some backup jobs that were happening and had been happening for years, but no one kind of realized they were going on. And it's that kind of thing, and it's kind of taken with a pinch of salt what are you being told, and really understanding what's happening on the wire.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I find is that the documentation, if they do have it, tends to be centered around a technology team. So whilst you might get a fantastic layout of the switches and how they all interconnect and even how they're loaded into the racks, we don't know how the data's flowing across the network. Mark, when you look at documentation in a customer, where do they normally start for you? What do they give you first?
We often get a network diagram, and we also get an overview system diagram quite often, and from that we can hopefully tell a lot, but often the network guys don't really know where the servers are, and likewise the application guys don't know where the servers are. We quite often get the situation in the larger companies where the application teams don't even know which data center the servers are actually in.
Yeah.
So the data flows is pretty tricky at that point, and it gets worse because sometimes we see cases where the network ops don't really know much about anything, to be honest, and it's down to the network design people to do a trace through to find MAC addresses and IP addresses and that sort of thing. But they're often not resourced to the project. They're off doing other things because they are really a project resource rather than an operational resource.
Yeah.
And I guess that's why you're kind of working from the client. So you're seeing what the client is talking to, and then you can work your way back through the system from there, and it's that kind of edge-in approach that we're talking about.
Yeah. Okay. So if we do get to that stage where we understand how the data flows, of course, one of the things we need to do is get analyzers into the data centers. That, because of the growth in the use of third-party data centers and co-location, that's producing problems for us as well. So, Darren, what sort of problems are you faced in that area?
Yeah, hello, Paul. More and more commonly, we're finding that there's an amazing lack of understanding about what the actual analyzers do. You can never actually assume that people know what a span session is or monitoring is, or that how our analyzers actually work and connect to the physical infrastructure. So one of the key things is not to make them ask questions, provide as much information, even though it appears very basic, and explain exactly how our equipment works. Because I say there's a surprising lack of understanding, even with some of the most technical teams you come across in these third-party data centers. So again, you can't assume that everyone knows about analyzers and monitoring sessions and how to connect them up. Then, of course, you've got the issues of actually getting the analyzer connected up. Quite often, even though you may have the correct documentation, or sure you have, quite possibly there's a lack of understanding of exactly what should be connected and how it should be connected. So again, it's always best practice to go over and ensure that the information provided is clear, they've acted on it, and they understand it. Once you've managed to actually overcome that, then really, you've made the job a whole lot easier, because the worst thing to do is have something connected and find it's connected wrongly, or they've not been able to set up monitoring sessions, etc.
Don't we also have a problem though, just even getting someone actually in the data center who can open the rack door for you to and knows where the space is to put the analyzer, to put it in, because it seems that there has to be so much negotiation up front and planning. It's not like the old days where you could almost just roll up and go in there and someone would find some space in a rack somewhere and you'd put the analyzer in. It seems to be getting more complicated.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, more and more now you actually can't actually. Sorry, more and more now you can't actually send equipment without someone actually being in a receiving there. So you can't store boxes or packaging in a data center.
Yeah.
The more and more of them are getting very secure, and they're getting more sensitive about what equipment goes in. So, normally there has to be some negotiation exactly where it's going, and quite often you have to supply power specs, the amount of heat it's going to output. So they normally get quite touchy about, exactly what's going in, and understandably so, because a lot of these environments are actually fairly high security.
Yeah. Go on, Neil. You had something to say on that, I think.
No, I was just saying really that increase in third-party data centers and shared data centers, it just adds a whole new level of complexity.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so the other issue that we seem to face a lot is on span sessions and getting span ports and span versus tap and all those things. So, Mark, as you're the network man, what's the contention on the span ports these days? People seem to be using them for so many things, and that gives us a lot of grief.
Yeah, that's one issue. I was going to divide this into various things. First, when we want to set up a span session, we've got the same sort of governance we have with getting analyzers in. So getting a tap or a span session set up goes through the same sort of change control procedure. So if in a smaller company, they might have a data center in the office and have an emergency change procedure, and off you go.
Yeah.
But with a larger corporate, then you won't get an emergency change unless there's a P1 or P2 incident, and so you're reduced to standard change procedures. And as mentioned before, with third-party data centers, it gets even more difficult. So in terms of span, there's often no network resource, as I said before, dedicated to dealing with the problem, and so we never know whether, for instance, there are other spans available for use, whether all the span sessions are taken up. And also, in the case of some kit, obviously with Cisco, you have 2 span sessions as standard for port spanning, but with other types of network hardware, you may only have the one. So
do you think packet brokers and things like that separation from the configuration of switches to the availability of network data, do you think that's going to help, or is that not
in a large organization where we've got that sort of equipment, then it could help if they know how to use it properly. Obviously, it can remove some of the change restrictions because everything's already wired up, span sessions are in place, and it's just a matter of then directing the right span packets through to the right sort of analyzer. Now, that's not always the case. So, I mean, we have got a large customer where they have a switched infrastructure, a packet, packet broker style infrastructure, and yet they seem unable to provide us with the traces we need in any timely fashion. And that again is down to the network resource not being part of the troubleshooting process.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of it is around that bureaucracy.
Yeah. So this is. Sorry, go on, Karen.
And then, of course, you have technical issues with span. Span isn't a totally risk-free procedure. We saw many problems with Nexus 5000. Cisco became aware that span sessions on that platform were causing back pressure on real production traffic. vSpan can be similar, spanning a whole network. Cisco do now say that you can, if you're spanning a VLAN, you can get back pressure on the production traffic. So that's a bit of a worry. Taps are always better. Of course, taps have the added difficulty that there's definitely going to be some outage on links. There's going to be a lot of change control procedures to go through. There's going to be more points to tap because for each full duplex you're likely to get 2 monitor points.
Yeah.
And aggregating those monitor points with Wireshark as we do it's slightly fraught. I mean, I have seen that when aggregating 2 tap feeds, there's a lot of out of order packets within the trace. Although the timestamps may be correct as they come into WinPCAP, when they actually get stored to the file, they're actually out of sequence. So the times, you get negative deltas between packets, which is a bit of a problem.
Yeah. Okay. So the complexity now has moved on because, of course, now we've got virtual switches and the whole virtual switching environment is becoming very complex, I guess, leading up to SDN and all those types of things. Neil, what sort of ways do we overcome the virtualization capture thing?
Well,
Neil's gone dead.
When we look at virtualization, oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're good. Go on.
Okay, good, because, yeah. Okay. Well, our experience mainly is with server virtualization and VDI, and really the main problems in that are, first of all, that you may not even see traffic between guests on the same host. Those guests might move around between hosts. They might move dynamically with things like vMotion and DRS. And so you've got to have a capture solution that gives you a reliable data in all those sort of circumstances. Now, our preferred way of working normally is to use a virtual analyzer, and so to put a separate virtual machine in each physical host, and then you've got a number of options. First of all, with ESX for some while, and with Hyper-V only from 2012, you've got the ability to put the virtual networks into promiscuous mode, and then you have to basically make sure your virtual analyzer has got separate monitoring and management ports, so you can keep your management separate, and also that you're not stressing any of the infrastructure that you're trying to measure.
Yeah.
So that's one option. Another option that's quite widely used is just to run dump cap or TCP dump on the actual virtual server. But again, depending on the levels of traffic, that can be that can actually influence the type of problem that you're trying to solve in the first place.
Yeah.
Quite often we get lucky, and if you've got a well-architected system with the layers separated by either firewalls or separated into VLANs and then routing between them, you can then do conventional monitoring on the uplinks to the core, and you see all the traffic going out and coming back again.
Yeah.
So where possible, that's the solution with the least overhead.
I've noticed there's some third-party solutions around. For example, I know Ixia do this thing where they add a driver into the ESX host, and it can externalize all the traffic going through the virtual switch. I haven't explored it very far, but it's all apparently VMware approved. Sounds quite interesting. But the usual problem we have when we get into those sorts of situations is there are no spare ports on the backplane switch, on the physical switch, or whatever. So, but yeah, okay. I was
going to say the similar features available with Nexus. So, yeah, that would be the way to go going forwad.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to, by the way, for Tony and Tim, I will open this up in a second. We're going to go through this list and we'll have a broader chat. So one of the other issues that we've found is that if we've got an analyzer in a third-party data center, so for example, we've got a customer who has equipment in one of the big network providers here in the UK. The only way we can get access to those analyzers is to be sitting on the third-party service provider's network. Darren, you recently hit this problem, didn't you?
Yes, I've hit it a couple of times now. We have a scenario where we have third-party data center hosts quite sensitive equipment for a customer, and they won't actually allow the management port of our network analyzer to be connected to the customer network. So therefore, the only choice that leaves us is actually traveling to the third-party data center and using their equipment to connect to our analyzer. Now, that in turn does actually bring some problems with it, because it means, trying to get processed data off the analyzer or results makes it very, very tricky. Quite often you have to rely on them to collect the data for you. It's normally checked by their security team before it's either provided to you on a stick or a USB drive or even emailed to you. So it can actually add quite length to the process of doing analysis, and it can actually be very, very difficult, especially if the equipment that they supply to allow you to access the analyzer is actually quite low spec.
Yeah.
So it can add quite a bit of time, and it can be very frustrating. But again, it's important not to show it and just try and make the best of the situation.
Well, it's the way it is at the moment, isn't it? I mean, a couple of things I guess I haven't actually got on our list, but that are related is one thing is having to destroy disks from the analyzer. So we often have to unload the disks out of the analyzer, so they then stick a spike through them or whatever they do. Even down to portable disks that we take in, they usually keep them, don't they?
Yeah, that's becoming more and more common now. They seem to be a lot more aware about letting data out of the data center. So yeah, we are starting to see a lot of our disks actually being removed from the analyzer, destroyed, which again also brings up the subject of any data on your laptop. Quite often, it's not unusual for them to ask to inspect your laptop to make sure you haven't taken any data out. So yeah, they are starting to get very sensitive about moving data out of the data centers.
Yeah, not surprising, especially with some of the customers we work with. So that's a challenge in itself, and of course the other big challenge that seems to be, well, there's a couple more challenges that I can think of. One of them obviously is the ever-increasing data rates. So we're now getting we're having to monitor 10 gig links. Mark, I'm going to come back to Darren actually, because he's got some experience with setting up our analyzers to try and get them to perform. But Mark, what's your experience with that?
Yeah, I mean, we see 10 gig bundles quite commonly now, and obviously 40 gig and maybe 100 gig is on the way. We use commodity servers to capture our data, and we're using Wireshark, so we find the CPU is generally up to spec these days, but disk writing is the main issue. With really, you can get about 200 megabytes per second maximum to a single SATA disk. We only use commodity SATA disks. We don't believe that you'd get much more with using SAS, and it's more expensive. As Paul mentioned, we often have to chuck the disks away, so they're single use, and obviously the customer pays for that. So we want a fairly cheap disk to use. Although having said all that, although there are lots of 10 gig links around, we do see a lot of 10 gig links with 300 or 400 meg traveling across them most of the time, so it's not as bad as all that. We can obviously capture less the disk by taking a snap length which is less than full packets, so slicing, and we can use a capture filter, but that doesn't actually help you if, say, a span port's oversubscribed. The data's still got to get to it. So there's various issues there.
It seems to be going back full circle to where Neil and I started all those years ago, when we used to be capturing with like a 1 meg buffer on Token Ring or something, and you have to get quite imaginative about how you filter and what you capture and all those things. So
I suppose what you're saying there, Mark, is that in a lot of times with the fact that everything's encrypted these days, slicing the data, it means that we don't lose too much, because we're really after, a lot of the times we're just after the packet, the headers of the first.
That's right. Obviously, if we are only after the headers, then that's fine. But as you say, encryption, sometimes you actually want to decrypt, and you're not going to stand a chance if you haven't got full packets.
Yeah.
So it is going to be an issue for us at times. Yeah, I mean, taps are usually better than span, and obviously we can get bigger servers with more disks or dedicated capture engines. You can use VACLs to filter on Cisco, some Cisco kit, but of course if you do that, then you're back into a lot of change control, because a VACL change is not generally considered to be low risk in the same way that a span port might be.
Yeah, okay. Your talk about encryption nicely segues me onto my last subject before I throw it over to the other guys, which is the challenges posed by encryption. And Neil, you've probably had as much experience with the encrypted traffic as we've all had. So, what have been the challenges you've found?
Well, I'll keep this very brief, but obviously encryption's being used more and more frequently, and particularly in the problems we look at is in web traffic, web or web service traffic. And as Mark said, to stand any chance of decrypting that, you need to capture full packets, and you also need to have the private key, which is not very easy to get in most production systems. So what we prefer to do, where possible, is to improve the log information that we collect so that we've got a better way of correlating that with the encrypted traffic on the network.
The web log.
For example, sorry, I didn't catch that.
So I said the web log information, you mean?
So we're talking about web log information in in systems like IIS and Apache. IIS was a lot worse and is now catching up to Apache. But also client-side logging with products like Fiddler, where we can actually get full session information, full web session information for for browser type environment.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. Okay, we're up to our. We thought we'd at least give everyone 5 minutes to have to throw in their 2 pennyworth. So we'll shut up now. Tim, what are your views?
Oh, I think it's a shitty day. Oh, I'm just kidding. Yeah, diagnostics in general, just acquiring the information. You talk about VACOs, you talk about span ports, you talk about, FM. That stands for frickin' magic most of the time. I do a lot of criminal investigations now and forensic stuff, and I go in and 99.99999% of the time, people don't have a clue what's on their network. They don't have access list. They don't have even a fundamental baseline, which is really something every network manager should have, much less an accurate map of their network settings on their span port, or on their switches. So and Tony is like you guys. He does this every day, and it's a tough job just getting the information. And now with virtual circuits, a lot of people try to put out a virtual access point out in the network. And of course, what's the weakest thing we have in our network today? The WAN. And that's the same thing to me as an RSPAN. So let's put an RSPAN out there, and then let's really knock down our WAN so we have no traffic that's viable. People don't think things out very well. I believe we're in the era now where people are beginning to say, hey, we do need to build a visibility plane. We've got management planes. We've got all these different planes. Very few people look at building a visibility plane. I think that's becoming essential. Some packet brokers. Yeah, and some of the packet brokers out there are nothing but weak span ports that are dedicated. People don't test anymore. They just plug and pray, and I guess that's the fundamentals we got from Microsoft.
Yeah.
So
I think the thing is, from my point of view, we talk about the difficulties of us going in and doing this type of analysis, but quite frankly, when I see what happens inside the organisation, it doesn't seem to be any easier for them. So, Tony, what's your experience on that? You go into the same sorts of places as we go.
Yeah, I find, I'm sure your guys have the same issue. I find probably 30 to 40% of my job has nothing to do with technology. It's trying to get the story out of them, try to get the same story out of them, trying to validate that documentation that they pulled out of some drawer that's who knows who did. Typically it's a bunch of napkins scribbled together, and some guy's trying to piece it together as you're flying through it. So after you get past the person, I say the carbon interface part of it, the people, you find at some point the technology starts to come out. I find myself personally, a lot of times I find capturing those packets is the hardest part, because span ports, taps, you can't plug something in today, you got to wait for a maintenance window. All those types of challenges I find is probably 80% of the time you've spent on site, and that 20% of the time you finally get a chance to capture a packet, and then as everybody just threw into the pot a few minutes ago, packet slicing, encryption, I'm trying to summarize everything that was thrown out, but yeah, basically everything that everybody runs into is a daily challenge. It's and then to top it all off, you don't work there, and I always have to chuckle when they say we've been hammered on this for a year. We'll give you a day.
Yeah.
Go at it.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, though, don't you find that in some ways you being a dedicated resource, and you find that because they're paying, doors get opened and procedures get, expedited or whatever, and you seem to be able to, or we certainly seem to be able to achieve more than the internal staff.
Oh.
And I don't know why. It's
well, I chalk it up to two things. Number one is you're not bogged down with all the politics of that company. Your time management meetings, your time sheets, and all the rigmarole they go through daily. That goes away, and you get to concentrate on a problem. The second part of it is you're dubbed as the network specialist, getting paid to fix it. So this guy's only got a day. You better do what you can to help him. But even in some cases, I'm sure you've been through this. We can't do anything until next week or tomorrow night or 3 a.m. or and then what? And then you're waiting.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Well,
tell me about it.
I think most people look at diagnosticians like Tony and you guys as really Merlins of the 21st century, because number one, the guy that actually built the network originally is probably long since been gone. When they built the network, they built it with the cheapest components they could possibly get to do the job. No one's kept records. They probably don't have any type of normal routine for maintenance and preview. And if they did, they wouldn't know what to do except just put in the bug fixes. And you can't, like you mentioned earlier on, that you can't even really rely on the vendors like Cisco. Cisco's for years, and I don't know if you know the story how SpanPort came about, but that was just a marketing ploy to begin with. It was never designed as a monitoring port. It was designed as a test port. And originally you couldn't get access to it, but some guy in marketing said, hey, let's give them access to it. They can look at their data. Okay? And of course, Cisco sells switches. And if the switch that you're trying to monitor to a span port and you're taking the switch down because you're using span, and you can do that, you just need a bigger one, a better one, a faster one, more this and that. So I guess I go back to one of the things Tony and I talk about all the time, and Paul, you and I have talked about it many times. People don't test to make sure that what they're doing is viable. And be thankful we don't have ArcNet anymore.
I guess one last thing I'll throw into the pot, just because I want to get my 30 seconds over Tim on this. It's the big thing I do with a lot of my customers, and I don't joke about this anymore, a third of my problems are fixed by actually going out for a walk in the plant, walk in the network. And you know how many times you walk around and they say, well, what's that? And there's some rogue thing in a cabinet or up in some ceiling tile or under a desk or in a server cabinet, and they're looking at you to tell them what this thing is, and you've been there probably 15 minutes, and that guy's been there for 10 years. And guess what? A lot of times you fix the problem by just going for a walk.
Yeah, I think us guys all often have to take a break from it, because often you find that you figure out the problem, in that just if you disengage for a short period of time and have a think and at least go back in refocused. Okay, well, it's 18:03. We've overrun, Denny. I'm sorry about that. But I think it's we've got plenty of things that we can chat about in future sessions as well, and maybe some follow-up stuff to what's going on here. And hopefully there are some people out there who watch this and fire off some questions to us, because we'd love to hear from them.
Hey, I have one comment to make, if I may. I think it would be wonderful if we came up with some organization where we vetted and gave out credentials to people that were, quote, and I'll use a quote, certified network analyst forensics people. I know that several companies here have gone to local private investigators and run all of their employees through the National Crime Information Center, through Interpol, through the Georgia RCMP in Canada, and they actually carry those credentials around with them. And a lot of companies now, their analysts are actually what do you call it, Tony, when they got a bond on them or whatever they call it. So I think that's another thing that we've seen so many.
But
criminal activity.
Tim, I thought we had this conversation before that we have long since gave up on screening stupid. we're always, I mean, all of us sitting here are really trying to fix what stupid do.
It's not just stupid. That's a very cynical view.
Sometimes cynical bugger, isn't he?
It's resources, priorities. There's all sorts of problems. I mean, we work with some really bright people, and usually the reason that they can't fix the problem for themselves is because it's outside their remit, or they've never given the time to do it, or there's all sorts of reasons.
Yeah, but analysts are special people. Like Tony said, you got to have filters built in. You've got to see through the BS. You got to see through the WTFO, and you know, you got to go. But I do think we need to vet. I just had a situation here where they hired a girl or a lady or a female to work on their website. Company was 100 and almost 80 people. Now they're down to about 20 people. All their ID has been stolen. The company's been ripped off. And if they had just done a simple search on the girl, on just going and put her name in Google, they would have found out she's under 2 federal indictments already.
Okay.
So, like Denny pointed out, we can't fix stupid.
I can't speak to that.
Hey, Paul, I wonder if we could open up to your colleagues, let them unmute themselves and hear what they think, if they have. If today's forum is beneficial to them, because I think the contents are great. There's no doubt in my mind that this is beneficial to our audience. Why don't we start with Neil? What do you think?
He's gone dead.
Well, okay. Well, Mark, you go first.
Yeah, what was the question? Do I think it's been beneficial?
Yeah, is this something that is worthwhile to you?
I think the community has got a lot to offer me.
Tried it. It's really
something
good.
I'd like to be more involved in. Everyone's gone away now.
No, it's all right.
No, we're here.
Right,
go, Mark.
I'm going to go on talking. Yeah, I mean, it's a beneficial community. This particular exercise has been very interesting, and it's nice to meet you all. That's for sure. So yeah, it's been a benefit.
Okay, thank you. And Darren, you know, I think that what we try to do here, Tim and I, and Tony and other and Paul and other authors for Love My Tool, is really to find a way to contribute to our community. And you think we? What do you think of what we do today?
Yeah, I think it's very useful because we can share our actual experiences and offer practical advice. So I think this could be of very high value.
Yeah, thank you. And Matthew, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's useful. I mean, obviously the team that we're part of, you know, we're kind of working on the same projects together on a daily basis. So definitely working and speaking with you guys to get another opinion or another angle at the same thing. It's useful, and yeah.
Thank you. And so before we close the show, Paul, I know you said something about your website not being quite ready, but I think it would be a good opportunity to just talk about that. What is it that you try to do with this website, and what is the website?
Okay. You may remember a few episodes ago I blurted out that I thought that we could teach anyone how to troubleshoot problems in a systematic way, and it's the way that we've been doing it for the last 25 years. What we decided to do was we wanted to share some of our knowledge and experience with the industry, and we're really trying to move people's whole approach to troubleshooting problems to a more evidence-based approach, the sort of approach that Tony and people like him use every day. Because at the moment, I don't want to get too rude about this, but I get really frustrated with people who sort of take this black magic, black hat type approach to troubleshooting problems. I think it's all nonsense. Those days have long gone. People are still trying to fix problems in the same way as they were fixing them 30 years ago. And I think we need to move the industry on. And we've got new challenges coming up with I was with a customer today who told me they've got a target to move 75% of all their systems into a cloud environment within 3 years. Now that is going to give them all sorts of problems in terms of troubleshooting end-to-end performance and stability issues. And I want to share a systematic approach to this. So we've been working really hard on documenting how we approach the analysis and trying to share some of the resources. So we came out with this Wireshark plugin called Transum, which does some performance analysis work, and we wanted to share that. So we decided to launch this website called TribeLab. So the actual URL is TribeLab0, Z-E-R-O, let's get it right, TribeLab0.com. So have a look at TribeLab0.com and you'll see what we're about. I'll tell you more in a future episode.
Yeah, I look forward to that. I look forward to finding a way that we can kind of tie all these things together, because I think we're all trying to achieve the same objective, which is to bring our own experience to the community. Tony, talk about that. This is what you do, right? You happen to have some open slot today and join us, and I'm very thankful for that. But during the days, you teach. You do this for a living, right? You have your class and all that. Talk about that, Tony.
Yeah, sure. Two things, I guess. The first thing I do is vendor training, but I do it with a twist. So, for example, Fluke Networks will sell an OptiView to a customer, drop it off. Typically, the customer leaves it in a shelf until something blows up, and then they try to figure it out. What I do is I show up with the tool and say, hey, guys, let's plug it in, and let's figure out what's going on your network while I teach you how to use the tool. So it's kind of real live network training with a real tool, with a real network, with real staff, and usually with real problems. And I can't tell you how many times we found problems that weren't problems yet. And I tell people all the time, 724, you've got errors, you've got problems. The only time you notice them is when they can't recover anymore. And then guess what? Then it's a problem. But it's been there all the time. So that's one thing that I like to do on site, and we call those customized on-site training and that sort of thing. The other thing I do is every once in a while I do a public class, and just a shameless plug, we've got one scheduled for September for 3 days, and it's basically I get a classroom, I get a switch, access point, whole bunch of open source tools, and we sit in a room and I teach people how to break things, because if you know how to break it, then you know how to fix it. We do everything from misconfigure bandwidth shaping on a web server, half-full duplex mismatches, how to do performance measurements, how to use Wireshark, how to use MRTG, things that people should be doing every day. And the reason why they don't is because they think it's this big overwhelming task when they're not. And my big catchphrase I teach people is, I can teach you how to do a dozen baselines within an hour, and each one's going to take less than a minute. As soon as people hear that, then they're more inclined to do it. If people hear baseline, they think it's a 3-week process, 5 days. They're never going to do it. But if you can show them tactically how to do a baseline in 30 seconds, and that's one value, then they can do another baseline for 30 seconds. That's another value. And guess what? Now you got a trend. So that's the big thing we try to do in these public classrooms. I only do one a year. And like I said, we got one coming up. I scheduled in September for 3 days. And that's it. All my training isn't pre-canned. I'm not a big fan of PowerPoints. I like real networks. Surprise me. Let's figure it out. And I tell people I may not have the answers, but I'll show you how to figure it out.
It's like bubble gum. It's hard to chew at first, but pretty soon you're blowing bubbles.
Just like that.
Except that we often have to chew it after other people already chew it. So that's a problem.
Lovely.
That's why Tony gives out fresh bubble gum.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I want to again thank you for all our new colleagues today. I really appreciate you joining us, and I can't put it just in words how much we're helping our community. I talked about this a little bit last time, which is that I really think that we should take this Shockfest experience beyond just 4 days out of the year. There's something Tim has been involved with Shockfest. We've been a contributor by being basically the videographer, recording all the sessions and keynotes and put it on the website. And we work really well with the people at Shockfest. But one of the things I have learned is that it is a very unique experience. First of all, it brings together people all over the world. It's a very international event, just like what we're doing today. I mean, there's no borders here, right? This is really without border. The second thing is that it's vendor neutral. People don't come here because they want to sell or buy one particular brand of machines. We're not here to. Instead, what people come to Shockfest is to really to share experience. And what's interesting is that they don't just share the very advanced knowledge. They do that. There are some classes for the really advanced people, but it turns out that a lot of people benefit from either learning for the first time or relearning stuff that they shouldn't know about all the basics. So in that spirit, we went out and we now have access to shockfest.tv, and it is just pointing to this landing page where we put all the Shockfest video. And going forward, Paul, as you build your website, and we're going to continue to do this panel discussion. I think this is a very, very important forum, and I think that we could probably do this once a month, kind of bring people back together and have discussions. At the same time, as you build up the content for your website, you might find that you have some sort of lecture series that you wanted to do. And if you could kind of cater that to the people who normally would come to Shockfest, and then the shockfest.tv could be one thing that unifies us, right? And the invitation goes out to Tony as well. You already are doing. I mean, you just everything you do is really. I mean, you have this wonderful way of taking a huge problem and just break it down into what I call a digestible portion, right? And I think I look forward to building this. Now, of course, we have to be careful that we don't step on the wrong toes. And but it turns out that no one really owns Shockfest anyway. So, and we are in contact with our friends at Shockfest, and they seem to be everyone. If you put the politics aside, everyone seems to think that's a great idea to extend that beyond 4 days. So, with that, again, I thank you. I thank everyone. Thank Darren and Matthew and Mark and Neil and of course Paul and Tim and Tony. And we'll see you next week. Thanks again, and go out there and be good. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Hang on, guys, for a minute.